Paul Sumaroni.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's indeed a great pleasure to take a call on this first reading of the Dairy Industry Restructuring New Sunset Provisions Amendment Bill. But of course, it's, in reality, it's not really the first time that this has been before the House, because this is simply extending a very good bill brought before this House initially by a Labor government. And just following on from that last speech, I note that the sector that the member was referring to are actually deeply disappointed in this current government, because they've even worked it out. Federated Farmers has worked it out that this government doesn't have a plan, that it's simply, and I think this bill demonstrates it, simply picking up what Labor had put in place and extending those provisions, because that's simply what this bill does, is it picked up what Labor was doing and says, well, let's do it for a bit longer. And I think that demonstrates again, Mr Speaker, once again, that this government really hasn't got any fresh ideas. It hasn't got a clue about what to do for this sector. And I think I was surprised that the former member actually chose to spoke about research and development investment in this sector, because this is an area where this government has performed woefully, Mr Speaker, because one of the first things that they did on taking office was to cancel the Fast Forward Fund. The Fast Forward Fund, brought in by Labor, that the dairy industry in particular had thoroughly endorsed, because they knew that having guaranteed large amounts of funding going forward for 10 or 15 years was the way of the future, and that was going to be doing something comprehensive and, yes, actually for the future, not the short here and now that this government likes to focus on and, fiddling around with tax swaps around and those types of short-term measures. But the Fast Forward Fund was actually going to deliver something tangible in terms of research going forward for this sector, because, Mr Speaker, this sector is the backbone for New Zealand, but it can be so much better, because it's my belief that this sector, the dairy industry sector, will really excel. It does pretty well now, but it will really excel because our place in the sun is to have niche products. That's our place in the sun with New Zealand and the rest of the world. We are a food producer, and we will do best when we are smart and ahead of the pack. And that's why the Fast Forward funding was so important, because that was going to deliver this country, that industry, the ability to be smart and ahead of the pack. We will not win just producing more and more volume, Mr Speaker, because the markets now that are opening up worldwide for producing the products that New Zealand produces from the dairy industry are so much larger, so much closer to the markets, and can do it much more cheaply. We will not win the race to the bottom by trying to produce more and more volume, more and more cheaply. We will win because we are smarter and we have niche products and we market them well, and we are at the top of the pack, not at the bottom of the pack, not going for the low-value product, the low-value, high-volume product, but in fact the very niche market. However, Labor does, and I wouldn't want to give the impression that Labor is not supporting this bill, because of course it's our own piece of work, so of course we're going to support it, and this government's run out of ideas, and it's the only thing it can bring forward now is to just extend a piece of legislation that we actually put in place. Because the bill does seek to extend the period of time which Fonterra must provide fixed-price dairy solids to other dairy processors in order to foster competition in the domestic industry. And it's that element that I just want to focus on for a little bit in this first reading, Mr Speaker, because fostering competition is quite an interesting thing to think about when we look at the players here, because of course we have Fonterra, but we have other competitors such as Open Country Cheese. And one of the things I'd like to ask the government to consider is if they will regulate on this basis so that Fonterra has to have certain obligations towards these other players, is it prepared to also regulate to ensure that that competitors like Open Country Cheese have to pay the same wages as Fonterra does for processing milk solids? Because I think we can all remember, if our memories aren't too short, that about this time last year there was a major dispute happening in the Waikato, in Waharoa, a wee community I happen to know pretty well. It's where my mother was born and raised. And in fact, the dispute was happening right next door to our family farm. And that dispute was over the workers of Open Country Cheese, a processor that's going to benefit from this piece of legislation. Those workers being paid significantly less than workers processing milk for Fonterra. And I don't think that's fair, Mr Speaker, and I'd like the government to have a good think about this while they're considering this piece of legislation. Why don't we look at having, within industries, the same wages set? Because here we are regulating, saying Fonterra must do things to foster competition, but on one side of the equation it's a little bit fair, that competition, because Fonterra have a collective employment agreement that they have negotiated in good faith with the Dairy Workers Union that requires them to pay a certain level of decent wages to the people who work in that factory, but when it came to Open Country Cheese, they did not have to pay those same wages. So, yep, here's Fonterra has to give Open Country Cheese the dairy solids at a fixed price, but can we fix the price for wages in those factories where it's going to be processed? That's the question I'd really like to hear one of the government MPs respond to, because I think if we're going to have this piece of legislation, there's another piece of legislation that needs considering, and that is making it fair right across the board so that the same processing costs actually exist in terms of labour costs. Not only is it fair, but it's actually good for improving wages, the thing that that government seems to have no clues about, because as we've seen recently, wages have been stagnating in this country, if not going backwards. And wouldn't it be good to see some regulations in the dairy processing industry that actually made it fair and actually lifted wages right across the board? I think that would be a really fine thing to see. The other issue that this bill causes us to think about is the issue about overseas investment, because as we know, some of Fonterra's competitors are owned by foreign interests. And Fonterra, as we know, very good example of a cooperative, owned by New Zealand, competing against companies that in some part are not owned by New Zealand but are owned by foreign investors. So it causes me, Mr Speaker, to think about what the government's doing in reviewing overseas investment, because that is one of the things that it's done recently, but it's not even a half-hearted effort to protect New Zealand against increasing foreign ownership of land. Foreigners with access to cheaper capital find the prospect of tax-free capital gains from buying New Zealand land very, very attractive, but there's no benefit to New Zealand in that. Labour's position on this will be much clearer and stronger. This review makes it even more apparent that Labour is the only party that can be trusted to keep New Zealand in Kiwi hands. And Maurice Williamson has something to say about this, but at question time today, the only thing he could tell this House was that he had not denied that number, zero number of land purchases by overseas investments, because in fact they've just been tinkering around the edges and it doesn't make any difference what they've done. So Nationals actually polled itself to a standstill on this issue, Mr Speaker. They know it's unpopular to sell more land, but they have no idea what to do about it. And instead, what they've done, they started off saying that the review would liberalise the overseas investment in New Zealand land, and then the Finance Minister, Bill English, said the strategic asset test was a nonsense, too confusing and too difficult. So what did they do? They kept the same strategic asset test, and they added some more confusion to it. That's what they've done, and that's resulted in the Minister, Maurice Williamson, approving all of those purchases that have come before him. He's not actually denied approval for any of them because they have done nothing real to protect New Zealand's investment in this regard. So, Mr Speaker, I just want to conclude by reiterating that Labor is supporting this bill. Why wouldn't we? It was our approach in the first place. This government's run out of ideas, and this is just an example of it. The only thing it can think to do for dairy industry restructuring is simply extend the time frame of a very good piece of legislation that Labor put in place in the first instance. Thank you.